I was approached by Mr. Karl Amann to comment on the lighting at the Cheval Blanc development. Um, and to me, lighting of sea turtle beaches, it's a fascinating topic because it's become such a science globally. We really have figured out figured out ways to minimize the impact of artificial light, and so there are formulas for how to do it. So I was interested in kind of pursuing that just to see what we could do, maybe to improve the situation.
Amazing. Can you describe the ecological significance of Anse Intendance as a turtle nesting site and how its value has been documented over the years?
Yeah. Okay, on Mahe, Seychelles, let me start. Seychelles is one of the most important countries in the world for nesting hawksbills and also for nesting green turtles, especially in the southern islands. And so I think it's very important that we, keep this in mind for when we're developing beaches. Now, Seychelles is also a very important place for tourism on beaches, and I would not want to interfere with that. I'm not opposed to developing on beaches, but I just think we have to make sure that we do it, in a sensible, controlled way without damaging the development. Because there are ways to do that. And in Mahe, I first came to Seychelles in 1981, and there were at that time quite a lot of hawksbills nesting on Mahe. But at that time, people were killing pretty much all of them. It was almost 100% just killing because it was legal to take them.
They were eating them?
No, they were killing them for their shell because the shells were being exported to Japan. And it was not illegal to do so. So it wasn't poaching. It was just, that was how it was an economic move. But it was quite clear that, this was not sustainable in the long term. And what people didn't understand at that time was that both green turtles and hawksbills take about 30 years to become adult. So you can go onto the beach and kill every single female for 30 years before you'll see a drop in the population. So you have to kind of think long term, And so at that time, we had a lot more turtles nesting on Mahe. And as now, most of the nesting was in the southern beaches, although there were other beaches that had more turtles then than now. But one of the most important beaches has always been Anse Intendance. And so, but it's also been a very popular beach, for visitors and for tourists and for locals to use too. So I wouldn't want to say, don't use the beach, but I'm just saying, let's make sure we're living in harmony with the turtles, and there are ways to do it.
Absolutely. So what are the main recommendations in the 2020 EIA report that were ignored during the Cheval Blanc development?
Well, the recommendations, they made a few points in there that I think are important. One of them is they recognize the importance of Intendance. And in fact, these days, Intendance is one of possibly the most important nesting beach on Mahe, especially for hawksbills, although to some extent for green turtles. And that environmental impact assessment also highlighted the importance of maintaining a good setback line.
Do you know what this setback line was?
Well, I think what they stipulated was that they would maintain the footprint from the banyan tree resort. And so they weren't specific about exactly how many meters it should be. And on Mahe, we do have problems with, we're up against the granite. And so you have a limited amount of setback that you can have. So that's always you have to balance that. But the second thing that they said in the environmental impact assessment was that it was very important. They made a big deal about during construction that there would be no artificial light visible on the beach. And they also mentioned that once the hotel got going, they would also need to be very careful about maintaining only turtle-friendly lighting. But unfortunately, they never really defined what was turtle-friendly lighting. But that's okay because there are global definitions of turtle-friendly lighting. And like I say, this has become a a science really in many parts of the world because, humans like to develop coastlines and everybody likes the beach. People like to put their buildings, their condominiums next to the beach, their hotels next to the beach, but they also want to maintain their turtles, so you get into this kind of balancing act. And it's become a real science. We know really how to protect the turtles from artificial lighting. And in some parts of the world, it's been, they have, well, there's many places where there's guidelines, but there's also in many places mandates. And two such places would be in Florida. As you may know, Florida has a long coastline, and they've got a lot of sea turtles nesting. And they've got a lot of development along the coast. And they've put in place regulations that during the turtle season especially, you need to control your lighting. You need to shade your lights so that it's not visible. So what's inside your accommodation is not visible on the outside, which is fair enough. I mean, you don't have to change your lighting inside. Just don't share it with the turtles. And then also there's different types of light that are better for turtles than others. And so they've got regulations in place. And they've been very successful. It's really impressive to see where they've got kilometers of coastline with tall buildings that are really, they have this under control.
They're respectful with the environment.
They're respectful, yeah. And the turtles are still coming. So the people like the turtles, and once people understand, why they need to shade their lights and why they need to use only a certain kind of light on the outside, they're pretty good about accepting that. And then in Australia too, especially in Queensland, on the coast there, you've got some very important turtle populations, and of course people want to be setting up their buildings and their condominiums in hotels in a place where there is wildlife that they can enjoy. And the government has actually put in place mandates. This is not, guidelines. This is mandates, and they've been able to control, kilometers of coastline, and people are reasonably happy with it. I don't think that, I think it's been working.
Do we have any such mandates in Seychelles?
We don't. We've kind of had kind of informal guidelines, I think. And so what I would really like to see, would be for the Ministry of Environment to put in place, in regard to EIA assessments, to have some basic regulations in place. And these things it's not painful. It just requires some planning ahead of time and willingness to do it. So I'm hoping that maybe this kind of discussion might get people aware that we're not asking for anything onerous. We're just asking, just to have a little bit of control of how the development proceeds. I'm not saying don't develop, but just be be considerate of the impact that you're having on the turtles and the wildlife in general.
Amazing. I definitely want to dig into the lighting a little bit more. But before we get there, I'd like to ask you, how do the violations of the 2020 EIA report impact the nesting behavior of both the hawksbill and green turtles? What are the specific risks for hatchlings due to these changes?
Yeah, I think the risks apply to both nesting females and to hatchlings. Some people say, well, the hawksbills are nesting in the daytime, so they don't care about the light at night. But I don't think we can assume that because, turtles are kind of scoping out the shoreline in the daytime and at night. And so if they see, brightly lit section of beach, it's unlikely they're going to want to come there even in the daytime because they see it as kind of a habitat that's a little bit not turtle friendly. And for green turtles, certainly, lighting will frighten the turtles away. But I think it will also frighten away the hawksbills, nesting females. And then as far as the hatchlings go, there's absolutely no question. This kind of lighting will kill them because the way turtles orient on the beach, like a hatchling comes out of its nest and it will go towards the brightest point on the horizon. Now, if you have a natural beach where you only have moonlight or starlight, The brightest point is going to be over towards the sea, and the sea, is kind of emanating light that we don't even see very well. Like on a perfectly dark night, it'll still be giving off light waves, and the light waves that it mostly is giving off are blue waves, and that's what they're very sensitive to, and so. This is problematic for the turtles, and so what we need to do is make sure that the brightest point is still over the sea. Now, if you have a development of any kind, whether it's hotel or a house or a restaurant or whatever, if that is brighter than what's visible from the sea, you're going to completely disorient your hatchlings. And what happens then, so the hatchlings, instead of running towards the sea, will start to go inland, and they start to go in circles because they don't know, well, that's the brightest point. No, that's the brightest point. And so you find the tracks of the hatchlings will go around and around. And then you'll find hatchlings that spend the whole night trying to crawl up a light post, and they'll just die from either crabs attacking them or dogs getting them or just desiccating or just becoming exhausted. And so by the time, even if they do get back into the water, by that time they're so exhausted that they're probably unlikely to, get out into the open sea as they should. Because when a hatchling comes out of the nest, it's full of energy, and it'll come out of the sand, look around, and say, there's the brightest point, and they just run towards it. Then they get into the sea, and then they start swimming, and they'll swim perpendicular to the coastline. But of course, when you've got artificial lighting, then all that gets messed up. So we just have to be kind of aware of that.
Wow, it's actually very interesting. So in terms of the lighting, the brightest point should be on the sea. And are there any other lighting adjustments that you would recommend for Cheval Blanc to mitigate these impacts?
Well, I think there's a series of things that are, not necessarily specific to Cheval Blanc, but specific to any development that is along the coastline. You need to, what needs to be done is to, minimize visible light outside. And so if you have a lot of light inside your buildings, let's say if you have, big picture windows, and you might want a picture window so that you can look out during the daytime. But at night you don't need to look out. So ideally what should be done in any development would be, if you've got this, like a big picture window, once the sun has gone down, what they're doing in Australia now is they have automatic blinds that come straight down after sunset. So your guests can look out and they can look at the sunset, but once the sun goes down, it's dark out there. You can't see much. So you might as well close the windows and, close the curtains. And, in some of these developments, these modern developments, there's lots of air conditioning. So, you don't need to have your window open. It's kind of sealed. And so it's easy enough to, to put down blinds or curtains and block the light from coming out. And so for the guest inside, nothing changes inside because, they don't have anything to look out at. So if it's closed, it's no big deal. But it makes a huge difference to wildlife on the outside. Another issue is the quality of the light. Now, there are, certainly people do need light for safety purposes. Like you don't want people stumbling around in the dark. But mostly for that, you really want to just light up the pathways around a building. And that can be done by keeping your light low to the ground. So what we would advise against is any lights that are shining upwards. It's not a good idea because that's mostly decorative. It doesn't really serve a purpose. And to be honest, I think it actually irritates a lot of people because I know myself, if I'm outside at night and there's, bright lights in my face, you lose your night sight. If you're with a friend, you can't see your friend. So you lose kind of any like romantic ambiance, Plus, with a lot of the guests that you get in these hotels these days are going to be older people whose eyes don't adapt that quickly to changes in bright to dark light. And so they've actually shown that it's helpful for older people to keep the light subdued so they can maintain their night vision. So I think that, you know, if you look at it like that, you're not only helping the turtles, you could be helping your guests, you know.
Absolutely.
And another thing too is I think we're learning more and more about the quality of light that is healthy for humans, and that which is not healthy. And I don't know, maybe you've heard, you know, that like they recommend if you're using your computer, computers, televisions, phones give off a lot of blue light. Now, blue light is the one that's the biggest problem for your turtles because blue light is very high energy, short wavelength. So this is also bad for people. They've shown that high energy, short wavelength blue light actually damages the retina of humans. It also interferes with your circadian rhythms. So if you're on your, you know, kind of your day-night rhythms, like what time do you go to sleep, what time do you wake up, what time are you most energetic, this is all determined by the quality of light around you. And so, you know, what a lot of health experts are recommending is wear red lights, red glasses, you know, at night if you're using your computer. And lots of computers, I think iPhones and, you know, all the Apple stuff, will have a built-in change that will remove all the blue light from what you're looking at. And that will make it so that, let's say you're working on your computer late at night, then you go to sleep and you'll actually sleep. Whereas if you've been looking at blue light, you're wide awake. And you might not be aware of the blue light. You don't see it as blue light. But what you've got is these high energy short wavelengths that are attacking you. So we're not that different from turtles. You know, we're all you know, we may not see things exactly the same, but we can both be affected by the negative aspects of it.
And it makes sense when you think about it because we are built to be in tune with nature, with the sun and the moon.
That's right.
And from a wellness background, I know that physiologically there's an impact with blue light.
Yeah.
Red glasses are a game changer.
Yeah, red glasses, you know, can be, and I know I myself, you know, if I'm working on my computer at night all the time, and if I put on red glasses, I sort of feel like this feeling of calm come over me, and it's you know, it's like subliminal. It's like, wow, why do I feel so calm now? Whereas before I was, you know,
yeah, and less strenuous on the eyes as well.
And so you probably are protecting your vision in the long term.
Thank you. So I think we've covered lighting. So tell us a little bit more about how the current lighting systems in these developments, for example, Cheval Blanc or some of the other hotels that you've seen in Seychelles, how does it compare to international standards?
Okay, another point too that I wanted to make regarding light is that if you look at white light can have varying amounts of blue wavelengths in it. It all looks white to us, but subliminally these blue lights are coming through. Now nowadays modern lighting has become very sophisticated, where you have LED light, where you can actually program your light bulbs to emanate exactly this wavelength of light that you want. So you can get rid of most of the blue light and then just focus on the warmer colors. You know, like blue is considered a cold color. and then as you get towards the yellow, orange, red end, it's a warm color, and those are more beneficial. It's sort of like a candle. You know, we evolved with fires, you know, and candles, not, you know, bright lights, and so that's more natural for humans, and it's more also acceptable for, you know, around wildlife. So it is possible, and there are whole companies that are built up around this, providing the right kind of lights for developments along the coastline. And so, you know, what I would recommend is that, you know, maybe at any of these developments, I'm not, you know, picking out one or the other, but, you know, any development along the beach should look into this. You know, what kind of luminaires, what kind of lights are they using, and try to access those that are in the warmer end of the spectrum, because it'll just be less harmful to the wildlife and also to the people.
Absolutely. And In your experience, are there other practices from these regions, let's say Australia or Florida, that we can effectively apply in Seychelles?
Yeah, I think like one of the things that is very important is to make sure that the indoor light stays indoors, at night. And in the daytime it's fine. You can have your windows open. You can have lights shining through. It's not a big deal. But once the sun goes down, I think it's really important to close the window in the sense of preventing the light from coming out. And it won't be obvious to the people on the inside because they have nothing to see on the outside. It's dark. It's dark out there. But on the outside, it makes a huge difference.
Yes, and I see a lot of people in Seychelles who want to have outdoor lighting. And it's something I've never really understood. It's a safety concern, but I find that it just creates a lot of light pollution.
Yeah, it's obviously different people have different tastes, and so you've got to deal with that. But I think sometimes you need to really look at what are you trying to do. Another thing too. Seychelles is in a position where we have beautiful stars at night. And this is becoming a big tourism industry, astrotourism, where people come to places that are dark at night so they can see the stars. And that's something that we could consider developing in certain places, especially the more remote parts of the country, or of Mahe even, or Pralan, places that don't have a lot of lights. If you can let people see the stars, and people pay big money for that, especially once they become aware of it. And apparently they've done a survey in North America and Europe. Something like 70% of the people they interviewed had never seen the Milky Way because there's too much light around and they never get to see it. So this is something that Seychelles could capitalize on if they wanted to do it. So you have to think of darkness kind of in the same vein as clean water, clean air, and cleanliness, clean lighting environment. In other words, darkness insofar as you can. Now, obviously, you don't want it to be dangerous, but what's most important is that that the lights are as close to the ground as possible. Like if you have a light high up in a rafter on the outside and it's lighting up the whole area, but what you want to do is make sure people don't trip down the stairs or something. Take your light from there and put it down onto the ground so that it's lighting the place where people are walking. And they'll have better night vision. They'll be able to see their friends better,
Lovely. Thank you. It's very interesting, and I think a lot of people maybe don't know about the impact of light, so it's a very interesting conversation. So I just want to move on to the mitigation and restoration efforts. And in your opinion, is it possible to restore the impacted areas to a state that supports turtle nesting? And what measures would need to be prioritized?
Well, I think some of the measures that that the EIA advocated was vegetating the beach platform, and I see that they're working on that, and so that's good. It needs to be thick enough, that it, so that you cannot see the light from the beach. But of course, you have to also but shade all the light that is now visible at night. Because I was down there, not too long ago, looking at the development on Intendance, and it was, there was an awful lot of light just kind of shining out. But it was all it's all light that could be blocked, or, take your lights and lower them to the ground so that you just have the minimum. And it actually looks quite classy when you have a place that is subtly shaded.
Oh, absolutely.
Another thing that it can be an issue is on the outside of buildings, it's best not to have too much reflective white. Now, I'm not saying that you can't have white. I mean, it's better if you have brown, because it won't reflect as much light. But what's really important is to make sure that the walls of the buildings will reflect as little light as possible. So, for example, you can paint them with a matte finish, or you can put stucco on it, and that'll keep it, from shining. Whereas if you have something like white marble, that's just, it'll just magnify the light and send it back out again. So those are the kind of things that people should be thinking about when they're when they're developing next to a beach.
You mentioned about the shrubbery, what do you call it?
Like the beach vegetation.
The beach vegetation. But Cheval Blanc, in the initial EIA report, they were not meant to touch that vegetation, and they removed most of it, didn't they?
Yeah, that's a problem. I've noticed that they are trying to, plant it back with mixed success. But I think they need to keep working on that. Make sure.
Why do you think they removed it to then replant it?
Well, I don't know. I mean, I don't build buildings, so I don't know exactly what's involved, and I'm sure it probably facilitated the process of building. But ideally, it's a lot easier, I think, to maintain what vegetation you have than to try to reproduce it, because, like, so far, there's still a lot to do to get it back to what it was before.
Absolutely. Are there any immediate steps that can be taken by the developers or the government to protect Anse Intendance and similar critical habitats in Seychelles?
Well, I just think, be aware of, like, if you look at the report that I wrote, it highlights what are the guidelines. Now, one thing to also think about from this perspective of Seychelles, Seychelles has built a reputation as a major, nation interested in biodiversity and promoting ecological, environmental,
Stewardship.
Yeah, and let me say that again. So Seychelles is, has built a very good reputation as a proponent of biodiversity and environmental stewardship, and this is great, and I think, in the past, I mean, we've had very good success with developments, maintaining the coastal developments, maintaining an ambiance that is compatible with turtles. And, there's a number of developments in the outer islands, like at Alphonse, Desroches. They've done a good job with keeping the lights from shining out onto the nesting beach. Also in the inner islands, places like Lemuria, places like Bird Island, they've done a good job, and so it is possible. But I guess you just have to kind of, make sure that people really understand the importance of it and what are the benefits of it. And so, Seychelles is a member of the CMS Convention. That's the Convention on Migratory Species, which includes, birds and turtles and so on. And Seychelles has been a signatory state and a party to this convention since 2005. And just in the last year, the CMS has introduced guidelines for controlling artificial light in the vicinity of wildlife, turtles, birds, so on. And so, the idea is by submitting these guidelines, they expect that they're guidelines, it's not mandatory, but they expect that their signatory parties will adopt them. And so, and these guidelines are pretty, I mean, the document is quite long. I've gone through it, and I've kind of produced a more abbreviated version that has all the key points. And, if, in the spirit of supporting this CMS convention, which Seychelles is a signatory to, if they were to, put these regulations or put these guidelines into the regulatory process of producing environmental impact assessments, I think that would, that could go far. And like I say, it doesn't have to be painful. It's just a question of planning a little bit ahead and taking it seriously.
Absolutely. And how important do you feel public awareness is in ensuring the protection of these habitats?
I think public awareness is critical. I mean, there's no, if people don't know about it or care about it, then, it makes sense. Why would government know and care about it? They're representing the people and what the people consider important. And, but what I have found is that once people are aware of it, they get quite interested in it. And appreciate, the value.
So what role do you think governments and regulatory bodies should play in enforcing compliance with environmental assessments, especially given the international significance of Seychelles' biodiversity?
Well, I think they should take it seriously. and implement it in as regulations. Because this is not something new, this is a established science. How do you control artificial lighting? And we're so fortunate these days because the technology of lighting is so sophisticated now. You can control exactly what wavelengths are being produced by your lighting, by your luminaires, and so it's all possible. It's just a question of doing it
and enforcing it.
Well, and enforcing it, yeah.
So, given your experience in environmental conservation, can you provide a comparison of the state of Intendance before and after the development, and just how irreversible the changes will be to the ecosystem?
Well, I think it's very important to get the lighting under control. I'd say that's the main thing. In terms of setback lines, the setback line was. I don't know. I've heard people say that it's gone beyond the original footprint. I don't know.
It has.
It has. Okay, because
yes.
I that's not my expertise because I wasn't.
I've looked into it. It's definitely encroached.
Okay. And that's a difficult one. Once you've got the setback line in place, it's hard to ask people to tear the buildings down. So I don't really expect that that's going to happen. But what I would like to see is that moving forward, all new developments take the setback lines very seriously. Now, in the inner islands, in the granitic islands especially, we've got a problem because we're basically up against between a rock and a hard place, right? Because there isn't that much setback that we can extend because you're right up against the granitic backdrop. But when you start getting out into the coralline islands or the outer islands, you do have a lot of flexibility because you can put your development as far back as you want. And personally, for any of these developments, I'd really like to see at least 50 meters back. People talk about 30 or 40. I don't think that's enough. I think you really need to go back at least 50. And an interesting example has been Bird Island. Now, Bird Island originally built this is back like in the 80s. They had built their villas or chalets close to the sea because people, they our guests like to be near the sea. Well, it got to the point that one night they had to go and rescue guests because the chalets were falling into the sea. Guests do not want to be that close to the sea. And so when they rebuilt those chalets, they built them way inland. They're 75 meters in. And okay, that's good for the turtles. It's good for the guests. Guests don't want to be woken up in the middle of the night. Grab your stuff, you're about to be washed away. That's kind of scary, But also it's good for your development. And this is one thing that I think that people have to keep in mind is even the infrastructure is going to be protected by a greater setback line because unfortunately climate change is a real thing. Sea level rise is a real thing. It's already been documented in Seychelles. Our sea level has gone up at least, it goes up several centimeters every, so many years. It's definitely, definitely a problem. And the predictions for sea level rise and inundation are dire. So the farther back you can put your infrastructure, the longer it's going to last before it gets swamped. and so it just, a lot of these regulations, they're beneficial to the people, to the infrastructure, to the turtles. I think it's a good thing.
I agree with you. Do you think it's possible to quantify or visualize the impact of the Cheval Blanc development? For instance, how many turtle nesting sites have been disrupted or what percentage of the critical habitat has been lost?
I wonder what that was.
Just came out of nowhere.
Yeah, I know, it landed on my foot. I wouldn't have jumped if I knew what it was.
That is so funny.
I thought it was a rat or something.
Wow, you must have been intrigued by the conversation.
Maybe it was, yes, protect our habitats. Anyway, sorry, did you want to say that again?
Yes,
maybe?
so I wanted to ask if it's possible to quantify or visualize the impact of the Cheval Blanc development. For instance, how many turtle nesting sites have been disrupted or what percentage of the critical habitat has been lost or will be lost?
Well, at this point we're in the early stages of, you know, of the development being more or less close to completion. It does take up a lot of the coastline, but what's the problem with light? Light goes beyond where the structure is, and so the light can badly impact an entire nesting beach. So you might have sea turtle nests farther down the beach, but if these little turtles come out and they see that light, they're going to head over that way and be killed because they'll have such a long walk to get to the light. I don't, I do see that it is likely to be a problem. We won't know 100% what quantitatively what the problem is until we actually document it, and that can be done because we have Marine Conservation Society and the Ministry of Environment are doing regular beach surveys, so they know how many turtles are nesting, and so be able to see how things change moving forward. But it really shouldn't come to that because we can predict that it's not good, and it can be controlled. It's just a question of taking certain mitigating measures to keep the light. It's really the light that's the biggest problem.
You mentioned that when you went to see Intendance, you could already see a lot of lighting coming in from the hotel. Has that, I imagine that has already had an impact on the beach and the turtle nesting?
Well, I mean, we're into the turtle season now, and so it will we can expect that it's going to impact this season, but it's not too late to do something. The season is young, and like I said, I'm not trying to say don't develop it. It just kind of keep it clean.
Yeah, what you're saying is very logical, and it seems to be internationally accepted at this point. Which brings me to my next question, which is, from your perspective, why has there been such a lack of accountability in enforcing the EIA mandates and protecting this critical ecosystem?
I don't know.
All right. So what entities, whether governmental or corporate, should have stepped in to prevent these violations? You're not sure why they haven't.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I think the Ministry of Environment is responsible for these sorts of things, and so what I'd like to see is to maybe we can work with. I'd like to work with the ministry and help set up some regulations that can be put into the EIA process, because I think one of the problems we have right now is that it's kind of vague. When you say, oh well, they must employ turtle-friendly lighting. Well, what does that mean? Now it does have a definition. So it's not like it's completely abstract, but maybe this should be put into the regulations so that it's very clear. If you're going to build here, make sure that your lighting is close to the ground, that the wavelengths are long wavelengths, that your lights are shielded. Shielding lights is very important. Like if you have, let's say, a light bulb, and all the lights coming all different directions, then you put a shield around it so that the light only goes down. That makes a huge difference, and so these are all things that are can easily be done.
Can you provide an example or a few examples of how similar developments have been held accountable in other countries that you know?
Well, like what I do know is that in Australia is particularly firm on this, and they've. In my report, I talk about this Budina Beach development in Queensland, and it's near a major loggerhead sea turtle nesting beach, and they've been very, very strict about like during construction you've got to do this, this, this. They have a whole set of regulations that are being enforced. During the construction, after the construction, and what it tends to require is not just people assuming that people are going to do what's right. They should probably, not more than probably, they should hire an expert on this. I'm not saying me, but people who are who are expert. There are experts around now who know about how to control artificial light, and they can kind of go through and say, oh, that light's a problem. You need to put a shield around it, or change that light bulb. It's a bit too blue. Or that window, there's light leaking out of the edges of that window. It does take a certain effort to hold a development responsible. It's one thing to just build it and then there's kind of a creep, where it kind of gets sloppier and sloppier. So they really just need to make sure that there is enforcement, long-term enforcement in place. But it doesn't have to be onerous. It's just, just have, now and then have somebody go down and check, say, well, okay, that light's a problem, let's cover it up. And that's what we were doing really, like I remember on Alphonse Island, the development out there was very conscious of the turtles because they're attracting fishermen and people who are really interested in nature. And when it started out, the lighting wasn't great. They had like big street lights all over the place, kind of like it looked like street lights. I got a big pole with a light on the top, and gradually all these things got pulled down lower to the ground, so that the last time I was out there, which was a few years ago, it was amazing. At night it was really dark. I mean, you walk around the island and it is dark, but everybody's having a good time inside. So it wasn't interfering with their ability to have fun. But it just takes, people just needed. They had people on site who every once in a while would check and say, oh, okay, look, that light's a problem. Let's cover it up, or let's put a shade around it. And it works. It doesn't have to be a huge big deal.
One of the things I'm very interested in exploring with these conversations is why Seychelles' government is failing to protect our environment, particularly in high-impact sites like Intendance. Seychelles is often celebrated internationally as a leader in sustainability and environmental protection. How does this project and others like it conflict with the country's stated commitment to conservation?
Well, I think maybe people just need to think more about this, and kind of, reevaluate and realize it isn't that hard. It doesn't. This does not have to be painful.
So what message do you think this development sends to the global community regarding Seychelles' actual commitment to environmental protection versus what is projected in international media?
Well, I think that Seychelles, it just needs to be aware that, they need to make sure that they don't stray off track too far, because it doesn't uphold the reputation, that they've been garnering over the years, and I'm sure they can do that. It's just, I think some of it is awareness. Maybe people aren't aware of how easy it is to fix these problems. This is not, like I say, it's not hard. It's not that hard.
Do you think that what's taking place in Seychelles at the moment in terms of development has an impact on our credibility as a country that advocates for marine and environmental protection on a global stage?
Well, I suppose it has the potential to affect our reputation. But I think I'm optimistic that the government officials care about this, and they just need to maybe be a little bit more aware of what is needed, and what it takes to control these things. It doesn't take that much.
What are the risks of allowing further developments to proceed without stringent enforcements of environmental laws, or environmental laws for that matter? Could this lead to a tipping point for Seychelles' ecosystems?
Well, I think it can. I think we're kind of chipping away at. People say, "Oh, it's only one hotel. Oh, it's only one piece of beach." But as you chip away at it, you lose. You lose. Now, from the perspective of turtles, which of course is the thing that I'm particularly interested in, Seychelles, I think, has a responsibility to the region in that we host the most important green turtle and hawksbill nesting populations in the whole western Indian Ocean. And the turtles, you know, the little turtles, the hatchlings that we produce, go out and they propagate the whole region. And so these other countries are also depending on us to make sure that turtles are able to reproduce and propagate these populations. Now, historically, the biggest problem that the sea turtle populations faced was people killing them. And you know, there's a long history of green turtles being killed for their meat and also for their callipee, you know, the cartilage that's below the plastron. In the early 1900s, thousands of green turtles were killed every year, and their callipee was dried. And like for one big turtle, you might end up with 1.5 kilos of callipee. So it wasn't a very
Sustainable.
yeah, it was kind of a lot of turtle being killed for small amounts of goods. But people really liked it because that's what they used for turtle soup, to make it nice and cartilaginous, you know. And so anyway, so that's what dropped the populations of the green turtles, especially in the outer islands. You know, like, I think that at the before 1900, there were probably you know, more or less equal numbers of green turtles nesting at both Aldabra and Assumption Island. But then when they started doing the guano mining, you had a lot of guano workers living right adjacent to the main beach. And it was a good source of extra income for them to go out at night and just kill turtles and dry the callipee. And so there were reports of 300 turtles a night being killed on that beach. And there was even a report that said, what a wonderful resource. We've been killing all the turtles for, you know, decades, and they're still coming up. Well, we now know that's because they have such a long age to maturity that the turtles you see coming up today hatched out of their eggs more than 30 years ago. And so there's a delay, you know. So people came to appreciate that. And so Seychelles has been very good at, you know, putting in place legislation to stop the killing of turtles. And that has been successful. I mean, our turtle populations have been increasing. You know, where they're protected, they definitely respond beautifully. But now we're entering a new phase, and that's destruction of nesting habitat. And it's a little trickier because it's more indirect. You know, people can appreciate, oh yeah, you cut the head off the turtle, that's not good. But they don't necessarily appreciate that you light up a beach, that's not good either. And if you restrict the available nesting habitat, you're going to have fewer turtles, and you get to a point where it can be, you know, difficult to turn it around. So it's,
Wow, so sad, so sad. So
but so fixable.
fixable, exactly. I love your optimism.
This is the thing. It is
Yeah.
fixable. It's not. You know, I'm not saying don't develop.
No. I think your approach is very fair. It's unbiased. You're not saying don't develop, or you just want to raise awareness about the importance of developing ethically and sustainably.
And responsibly.
Yeah, responsibly.
Yeah.
So what are the risks to biodiversity if other developers take this as a signal that environmental laws are flexible or unenforced in Seychelles?
Well, you know, you can have habitat destruction that spreads really fast, and pretty soon you realize, oops, we don't have any more habitat. So that's a risk.
With Seychelles so deeply tied to its ecosystem for tourism, cultural identity, and global standing, do you think developments like this one betray a certain ethical duty to future generations?
Yeah, I think. Well, I think you know, obviously, if you need to, I think whatever we do, we need to think forward. You know, how will this impact the future? You know, like if you destroy the habitat, if you don't have turtles anymore, does anyone care? You know, maybe they don't care. Maybe it doesn't matter. You know, so it's really up to people, you know, the citizens of Seychelles, to decide what's valuable to them.
Can you tell us a little bit about your experience working in conservation in Seychelles? Have you felt supported?
Yeah, my experience working in Seychelles has been fantastic, and so that's why I'm so optimistic, because you know I've really, you know, we've gone through periods in the past, like when I first came to Seychelles in January of 1981, most of the turtles were being killed. And almost every hawksbill that came up to nest was being killed on the nesting beach because it was legal. People weren't poaching; they were just, doing what people did. And green turtles were being overexploited. And even in the outer islands, the numbers of green turtles had gotten really quite low. And so, I spent 3 years doing a survey of the turtles, and also I was, I'm very interested in people. I'm not someone who just is interested in the animal. I really actually like people. I like culture. One of the reasons I like working with turtles is because part of me is a bit like of an anthropologist. So it fascinated me the way these guys were out killing turtles and hunting turtles, and I appreciate why they would do that. And so I spent a lot of time in the outer islands, living with these guys, going turtle hunting with these guys. I mean, we were eating turtle. I mean, that was just how life was, and to me that was very fascinating. But I could see that it was not sustainable, and so basically my approach was, okay, count how many turtles we've got now, count how many turtles are being killed, try to figure out what does the resource mean to the people, how can you modify people's behavior in a way that they won't suffer too much by, reducing the number of turtles being killed if that is what's necessary. And based on the figures I saw in the early 80s, it was necessary. And so I produced a report like that, and then I left. And I kind of left, I came back and forth, like I'd come every few years and work on different projects, monitoring projects. But generally, all I could do was just say, leave it in the hands of Seychelles. Okay, this is what I see, if you do this, this is what's likely to happen. If you do that, that's what's likely to happen. And Seychelles picked it up and ran with it. And we had some, people who were really good, like, people like Lindsay Chung saying, who really, pushed that, let's minimize the amount of exploitation going on. And then by the early 90s, Seychelles started to realize that, that there's money in live turtles because there's money in a beautiful environment. And I think people didn't quite realize just how crazy tourists are about how much they enjoy seeing turtles. I can't tell you how many times I've shown tourists a nesting turtle, and they were like, "Oh, this was the highlight of my whole trip. This is just so wonderful." And it's something that I think we could even capitalize on more than we already are. I mean, to some extent, the coastal developments are capitalizing on it. Like places like Lemuria Hotel, their turtles are a big thing, and they, explain to people why they need to behave a certain way on the beaches, and encourage them to see the nesting turtles, and they really love it, and so so I think when Seychelles started to realize, how much money you could bring in for this kind of tourism, they appreciated that it's probably not worth it to keep killing these animals. Let's keep them alive so we have lots of them to show people, and that's worked out really, really well. But I think in those days it was making the link between chopping off a turtle's head and numbers of turtles. And maybe now we just need to focus a bit more on the link between destroying the nesting habitat and numbers of turtles, because that may not be quite as obvious to people. It's a bit more subtle. And people might say, well, it's just one hotel. Well, it's just one stretch of beach. But if you have too much of it going on, you can really badly damage your resource.
It's fascinating hearing you speak about this because it's so interesting, and thank you so much for the work that you do for the turtles and for our country. It's such important work. I want to maybe deviate a little bit and talk about the Assomption development. Can you share your thoughts on this proposed development on Assomption, and what is the importance of the turtle beach, the nesting grounds on Assomption?
Okay, first of all, I want to say that I've always thought that having a hotel on Assumption was a good idea. I'm not opposed to building hotels on Assumption. I also was optimistic about it because it's all green turtles nesting there. And green turtles are easier to, they're more compatible with tourism than hawksbills are even. Because hawksbills are coming up in the daytime, and so, if you've got people running up and down the beach, You know, you can frighten the turtles even when they love the turtles. You know, it's a little bit harder to make a daytime nesting hawksbill compatible with tourism. You have to have a little bit more control during the daytime, in addition to your nighttime controls on lights. But with green turtles nest at night. And so when people are asleep, the turtles are active. When the turtles are active, you know, the people are asleep. And so if you can just make sure that your setback line is far enough and make sure that your lighting is under control, it is really possible to have a very vibrant green turtle population right alongside a development along the coastline. And so my concern with the Assumption project is really just to make sure that that they have controls in place to minimize the lighting that's visible on the beach, and then you'll have compatibility there. But also, I think it's also important to make sure that the setback line is far enough, because if you, and this is also good for the infrastructure. You know, if you've got your construction too close to the sea, as the sea comes up, and it is coming up, you know, you're going to be caught. So I think, you know, maybe that's another thing maybe people can think about. But what's really fascinating to me about Assumption is that the population, like I mentioned before, that, you know, I think that Assumption hosted a lot of green turtles. It probably as many or more green turtles than Aldabra did in the very early pristine days before people started killing them. And then when, you know, the population at Assumption was brought way down because of overexploitation, because they were so easy to exploit on this beach. The beach at Assumption is the best green turtle beach in the entire country. We know that there's characteristics of a beach that green turtles like. Green turtles like a beach that is very sandy with a wide platform. Green turtles like a beach that has a deep offshore approach. So the turtles can come up at Assumption during any tide cycle. You know, and when you get to some of the other outer islands like Aldabra and other islands like that, when the tide is low, the turtles can't come out and the turtles can't go back. You know, they're stuck. At a place like Assumption, turtles can come up and down at any tidal range. So it's a perfect beach. And it's also a longer beach than what we have at Aldabra. Aldabra has 5 kilometers of nesting beach. Assumption has about 7. You know, so it has the potential to, you know, really host a lot of green turtles. Now, at the lowest point, which was in the early 80s, I estimated about 200 turtles were nesting on Assumption, which is really low, but there just had been, you know, massive exploitation in previous years. And the Aldabra population at that time was probably down to about 800 females. Now Aldabra has increased by a factor of about 5, and Assumption has been increasing too, because Assumption also gets an overflow from Aldabra of turtles. So it has the potential to really host a lot of turtles. And this can be a great, you know, the guests would really like this. Guests love watching turtles, you know. So I just think, you know, I just would, you know, just request that with this development on Assumption, that they're just, you know, very careful about, you know, setbacks and lighting. And aside from that, I think it has the potential to be very compatible with nesting turtles.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So informative. Is there anything else that you would like to add?
I think we hit most points, didn't we?
Yeah, absolutely. I've gone through all the questions I had and you've answered them beautifully. So I think in honor of your spirit, I'd like to end with one final question, which is, what is your favorite thing about Seychelles?
There's so many favorite things I have about Seychelles. I love Seychelles. I love the land, I love the people, I love the turtles. You know, my experience I've been here now, gosh, since '81, on and off, mostly on lately, but over the last several decades. And you know, I feel very positive about Seychelles, and you know, I'm very optimistic and confident that, you know, that if with awareness, you know, people will do what's best for the environment and for the population and for business.
Thank you, Jeanne.